Hey there. Welcome back to the quiet side of time. Tonight, we drift toward the heat-soaked dust of Babylon. Dim the lights. Let your breath slow. Place your thoughts beside the pillow. If calm stories help you rest, you can always return. I've saved something rare for the very end. There was once a city that rose from river mist, built not in haste, but in slow, sun-baked layers of mud and desire. They called it Babylon, a name now worn down by centuries, but once spoken with reverence under skies filled with starlight and ash. The city did not sleep, not really. Even in the night, the courtyards breathed incense. The brick lanes echoed with sandals and water jars. And in the silence between footsteps, there was something older still, something buried, not gold, not bones, but something stranger and smaller. Clay, soft when wet, then hardened by fire or sun. Clay, the flesh of the Euphrates, pressed between human fingers, shaped not into statues or bowls, but into prayers. They made charms from it, tiny ones, some no bigger than a thumb, some flat as a coin, etched with writing or symbols or the faint outlines of a god's eye. And then they buried them. Into the foundations of homes, temples, and granaries, these people pressed clay tokens, as if whispering a spell into the bones of their buildings. They were called foundation deposits, but not in the way we think of foundations today. These were not just architectural, they were spiritual. To build without blessing was to invite disaster. To raise a wall without the earth's favor was to tempt collapse. So they placed charms under thresholds, inside cornerstones, beneath the first laid brick. Sometimes just one, sometimes dozens, pressed into place like an offering. Covered, forgotten, but never meaningless. And though the people vanished, the clay remained, waiting in the soil like a sleeping thought. These charms were not meant for the eyes of strangers, not meant to be admired in glass museums. They were meant to be hidden, to do their work in silence. Some bore inscriptions in cuneiform, those wedge-shaped syllables pressed by reed stylus into soft clay. Some bore names, the king, the builder, the deity. Some bore single words, protection, fortune, stillness. One fragment, uncovered centuries later, simply read, "Let it not be torn down." A request, a wish, a spell, preserved in the belly of a building that had long since turned to dust. The people of Babylon believed the world was filled with forces, not all of them visible, not all of them kind. A house, no matter how carefully built, was vulnerable to time, to weather, to spirits. So they whispered into clay and let the earth hold their worries. The charms varied. Some were square tablets marked with lists. Others took the shape of bricks, larger, heavier, made not to be moved. A few were figurines, their features worn smooth by time. Lions, serpents, small gods with wide eyes and uncertain smiles, and occasionally, just a human name, an ordinary person, left beneath stone. Perhaps it was enough to place your name in the earth and trust it would listen. Some foundation deposits included tools, tiny replicas of chisels, pickaxes, or baskets. Not to be used, but to suggest, here is work, here is order. One site revealed a bundle of miniature tools wrapped in linen, sealed beneath the altar of a temple. Delicate, precise, meant not for hands, but for eternity. Others enclosed beads, or bits of food, or feathers. Quiet offerings to no specific god, but to the act of building itself. It was not a loud faith, not the kind with choirs or trumpets. It was a domestic belief, soft, persistent, like breath against a window. They believed the act of construction required reverence, that mortar should be mixed with hope and roofs raised with ritual. They believed the walls remembered, that clay listened. And they were right, in a way, for the clay still holds their messages, thousands of years later, pulled from the soil, cleaned by brushes, lit again by sterile museum lamps. But for a time, no one knew these charms existed. For a time, they remained buried beneath the feet of empires. The Persians rose, the Greeks passed through, the Romans dreamed their dreams, and still, beneath all of it, those quiet charms waited, not cursed, not sacred, just watching. The people who made them had no word for archaeology, no thought that their prayers would one day be cataloged. But they knew loss, they knew change, and so they buried meaning in mud. In the oldest layers of Babylon, some charms have been found alongside footprints, fossilized in dried clay. A child, a priest, a builder. Someone stepped here just before the charm was buried, their foot bare or sandaled, leaving a whisper of presence next to the prayer. The archaeologists didn't expect it. They found the charm, then the print, then the silence. There's a kind of stillness in these finds, not sadness, not joy, just a soft echo of intent, as if someone long ago was worried and tried to press that worry into the earth so it would not follow them home. In Babylon, even bricks were not just bricks. They bore inscriptions too, tiny dedications, sun-fired into permanence. "This temple is for Ishtar," one reads. Another, "May this house stand forever." But it didn't, and yet, somehow, the clay remains. Some charms were buried during epidemics, others before eclipses, still others before marriages or harvests. Each one marks a pause in human time, a moment of breath held between before and after. The city changed. Its kings rose and fell. Its rivers shifted. Its gates crumbled. But in the soil beneath it all, the charms held on. Because clay doesn't forget. Not entirely. Even as it breaks, it remembers its shape. And even now, if you hold one close, you might still feel the warmth of the thumb that pressed it, soft, centuries ago. Just as the walls remember, and the floors, and the air, they all remember the charms, and somewhere far beneath the bricks, beneath the layers of silt and ash, there may still be one last charm, unbroken, unread, untouched, waiting for the next builder, waiting for the next whisper. But in the shadows of those foundations, fever was rising, and the clay would be shaped into something stranger still. In Babylon, no wall stood alone. No door frame rose without a secret beneath it. To build was to beckon, and to beckon meant risk. So they buried silence beneath the bricks. These were the foundation deposits, tokens, tablets, objects made of clay, pressed into the earth before the first stone was set. They were not grand. They were not meant to be seen, but they were always placed with care. The city itself was layered in ritual. Each new building rose not from nothing, but from the softened memory of another. Ruins under ruins, each one with charms curled deep in the dust, like seeds. Before temples, before houses, before the ziggurats reached up like ladders for the sky, workers paused. They smoothed the ground, they knelt in its heat, and they offered something. A clay tablet, a carved figure, a handful of sacred soil, sometimes just a name, pressed into mud by a trembling reed. It wasn't worship, not in the loud way of altars and processions. It was something smaller, a contract perhaps, between earth and builder, between silence and breath, and always it went beneath, under the cornerstone, under the doorway, under the hearth where bread would bake. There was no city regulation that required it, no law carved into stone, and yet nearly every structure, from the greatest temples to the smallest storehouses, held one. Archaeologists unearthed them like voices, not always intact, but still speaking. Some were tablets marked with the emblems of gods. Others bore only symbols: a star, a snake, a horned cap, a rising sun, each with its own meaning, each a whispered wish pressed into permanence. One small object was found beneath a threshold, a flat clay brick with a single impression, a handprint. No words, no image, just the trace of a human palm, laid there thousands of years ago, then sealed forever beneath the floor. Whoever left it did not want to be remembered, only witnessed. In another site, the ruins of a priest's dwelling, they found a tiny clay house, no larger than a sparrow, hollow, empty, its roof pierced with a single hole, a model, or perhaps a placeholder, placed there to keep spirits at bay, or to remind them where the true door was. Babylonians believed the world was crowded, not with people, but with forces. Not all forces were cruel, but many were untrustworthy, restless, hungry. A new building, fresh and clean and full of human breath, was a loud thing in the spirit world. It called attention. So builders quieted it. So they buried calm beneath it. Some charms were shaped like humans, wide-eyed, stylized, simplified. Their hands raised, not in defense, but in stillness. They weren't idols. They weren't gods. They were barriers, placeholders, silent sentries of mud and intention. In rare cases, their names were written on their backs. Etu, one said. Another, child of dust. Some were buried in groups, 4 at the corners, 1 at the center, a soft geometry of protection. They believed that the corners were thresholds, places where one thing became another, inside became outside, safe became uncertain, and so each corner was blessed, not with fire, but with clay. Sometimes charms were broken before burial, deliberately, a figure's arm removed, a tablet snapped clean in two, not vandalism, but ritual. Breaking it, they believed, released its power. A perfect object was whole, but a broken one was active. They were not superstitious in the way stories suggest. They observed, they tested, they remembered what worked. And when storms came, or sickness, or tremors from the belly of the earth, they responded. They wrote, they pressed, they buried, and then they built. Each charm became a dialogue between maker and material, between fear and form. The clay listened, the ground received, and the house grew over it, layer by layer, like skin over bone. Some charms included inscriptions that warned, not begged, warned. Let no one disturb this stone. The one who moves this shall fall by fire. Keep your hand still. Written not in anger, but in knowing. Even now, those words sit silent beneath ruins. The buildings above them are long gone. The beams have rotted, the roofs fallen, the walls split and crumbled. But the charms remain, dry, cracked, whole. Even after millennia, their lines are clear, because clay does not forget. It dries slowly, it hardens fully, and if not broken, it will last. The ancient workers must have known this. Why else choose such a humble thing? Stone was heavy, metal was rare, but clay was everywhere, and it took on shape like memory. Not fixed, but intentional. There's something tender in it, a quiet repetition, as if each builder, each family, each priest was trying to say, let this place hold, let this place stay, let no harm come to what we make here. Not all charms were successful. Buildings still fell, walls still cracked, the city still burned. But the act itself mattered. The pause before the brick, the whisper before the stone. It's hard to say whether the charms worked. There's no measurement for peace that never came undone. But perhaps that wasn't the point. Perhaps the act of placing them was enough. To stop, to breathe, to press worry into the ground and then move on. Babylon grew tall, it grew wide, it grew loud, but beneath its every step, there were murmurs, clay echoes, tiny watchers, soft reminders that someone, once, hoped this place would be safe. But the ground that held blessings also held fever. The sun over Babylon was not always kind. It ripened fields, it baked bricks, but it also thickened the air, turned sweat to salt, and made the breath shallow. When fever came, it did not knock. It entered like smoke, slow and sour. It clung to the skin, it whispered in the teeth, and no one knew its name. There were no thermometers, no charts, no words like bacteria or malaria or viral, only signs, only symptoms, a hot forehead, a red eye, a shivering sleep. Some blamed spirits, some blamed winds, some blamed curses, wandering barefoot through the city, searching for open doors. And so the people made heads, small ones, from clay, round or oval, flat-faced or long-nosed, always with eyes, wide, open, watchful. Sometimes the eyes were holes, sometimes just indentations. They were not portraits, they were vessels. The clay heads were not meant to resemble the sick. They were meant to confuse the sickness, to draw it in, to distract it, to become its home instead of a body. They called them apotropaic figures, though that name came later from other tongues. To the people of Babylon, they were simply protections. Clay shaped in quiet urgency, set beneath the lintel or into a corner, just beyond the edge of vision. They were buried like seeds, or tucked into walls, or set behind the bed where someone slept and coughed and murmured into the night. They believed illness could see, could smell, could choose. So the figures watched, eyes hollow, mouths sealed, made not to speak, but to absorb. Some were shaped like masks, others like dolls, stiff-armed and open-palmed. A few had animal traits, snouts, fangs, feathered brows, not out of fantasy, but to confuse what could not be seen. If illness came to take, let it take clay. Let it enter the vessel. Let it stay. Let it not return. Some were pierced through the center, a hole from crown to base, a channel, a passage, a way for the sickness to leave. Others were sealed inside small boxes, buried beneath floorboards or beside doors. If opened today, they might still carry the soft scent of the river's silt. They were not magical. They were not childish. They were practical. The people believed in balance, in signs, in unseen forces, not because they were primitive, but because they paid attention. They saw what illness did, how it arrived, how it lingered, and in the silence of fever, they shaped answers. One set of clay heads was found in a narrow alley, buried in a line beneath the threshold of a midwife's home. 5 of them, each with a different mouth, one smiling, one grimacing, one open, one stitched, one blank. No record remains of the woman who placed them, but the placement tells a story. She had seen many kinds of pain, and perhaps she hoped these little watchers might remember it for her. Another head was found pressed into a temple wall, so small it was mistaken for a pebble. It had no face at all, just the faintest impression of 2 fingers dragged downward through wet clay. As if someone had tried, then stopped, or changed their mind, or didn't know what shape the sickness would take. The fever didn't always strike the same. Sometimes it came with shaking, sometimes with dreams, sometimes with silence so deep the birds outside would stop singing. And when it left slowly, taking hair, taking clarity, taking children. So the clay heads multiplied. Some had inscriptions scratched onto their backs, soft commands, gentle threats. Stay here. I see you. Do not return. Written in cuneiform, with reeds dipped in soot and oil. Others bore symbols only the maker would recognize. A mother's initials, a spiral for breath, a dot for each child asleep in the next room. They were made by priests, by healers, by ordinary people. Some were made in workshops, sold alongside amulets and incense. Others were made in kitchens, between meals, with thumb and fingernail. Some had traces of ash, as if they'd been fired. Others remained soft, air-dried, fragile as biscuit crust, not meant to last, only to hold. The fever, they believed, was a thing with intention. It could move, it could choose, it could return. So they created decoys, traps, clay mouths to inhale the sickness, eyes to lure it in, shapes to confuse its hunger. They placed them where the wind gathered, doorways, windows, corners, places where air hesitated, where the invisible might pause. A few figures were found beneath staircases, buried with herbs, wrapped in cloth, perhaps placed there after death, a kind of burial for the illness itself, a ritual to send it down the stairs and away. Modern science would not call this effective, but the Babylonians weren't guessing. They were remembering. They had watched the rivers flood, the rats scatter, the fevers rise. And in clay, they kept their fears orderly. Each figure was a way to act when action was otherwise impossible. To make something, to touch something, to shape helplessness into form, and perhaps to tell the sickness, you are not welcome here. Today, the heads sit behind glass, labeled, tagged, cataloged, but in their eyes, still wide, still hollow, there's a kind of breathlessness, as if waiting, as if still working, as if the fever might return. And if it does, they are ready, because clay does not forget its task. It holds, it watches, it remembers the warmth of a hand, the hush of a corner, the smell of sweat and oil and worry, even now. And in the hush of that worry, a scribe reached for his stylus. In Babylon, there were those who listened not to the voices of men, but to the movements of clouds, to the twitch of a sheep's tail, to the gleam of oil on water, and to the stars, which burned in silence but seemed always to be saying something. These were the scribes, not poets, not priests, something stranger, softer. They sat with clay and stylus, listening for signs. When others saw a flicker in the lamp, they saw a warning. When others walked through a doorway, they noted the foot used first, left or right, and whether a crow called. They wrote everything down, not in paragraphs, but in patterns, single lines, stacked marks, lines pressed into warm clay with reeds that had once swayed along the riverbank. Cuneiform, they called it now. But then, it was just writing, and writing could trap things, especially things that could not be held in the hand. Omens were not always grand. A goat giving birth early, a dream of a broken bowl, the sudden swelling of the Tigris. Each detail had weight. Each moment became a code. The scribes did not predict, they prepared. Because to the Babylonians, the world was not random. It was patterned, layered. Every event was a ripple from something deeper, and the scribes were the watchers of the ripples. They read the livers of sacrificed animals, not for cruelty, but for knowledge. A liver was the seat of life. It pulsed with mysteries. The folds and creases, the color, the tension, each meant something. A hardened lobe might mean famine, a missing fold, war. They recorded it all, scribed into small clay tablets, some only the size of a child's palm, each labeled with care, date, time, moon phase. Hundreds have been found, filed away in ancient libraries, stacked like bricks, quiet as sleep. One tablet, unearthed near the ruins of a shrine, reads, "If the sun is surrounded by a halo and lightning strikes the east, the enemy will enter the gate." Another, "If a man dreams of a fish speaking his name, the river god is near." They are not poetry, but they are beautiful because they are careful, because they mean someone was watching. The scribes were not alarmed. They were calm, deliberate. They collected the world in fragments and stored those fragments in fire-hardened clay. Sometimes they buried the tablets, just like the charms, beneath thresholds, beneath beds, not to hide, but to anchor. One discovery, in a home near the ziggurat's base, revealed a tablet beneath a child's cradle. It bore a single word, peace. No instructions, no gods, just a soft command pressed into clay by someone whose hands shook slightly. Another was found beneath the floor of a granary. The tablet was oval, smoothed at the corners. Its writing read, "Let the store remain full. Let the rats forget." Sometimes the tablets were never meant to be read again. They were made, inscribed, fired, then entombed. To hold a fear is to ease it. To give it shape is to contain it. The scribes understood this. Some tablets were baked twice, once by man, once by accident. Fires, invasions, lightning storms, even destruction preserved them. Clay, once burned, endures. The scribes were also dreamers, not in sleep, but in discipline. They recorded dreams, not their own, others, kings, merchants, anyone who came with a story of the night, dreams of rain in closed rooms, dreams of black dogs on rooftops, dreams of teeth falling like coins. Each was written down, each categorized, each assigned meaning. If a man dreams he is falling endlessly, the goddess Ishtar is displeased. If a woman dreams of her hands turning to branches, her son will be born strong. Soft symbols, pressed into tablets, stacked in silence. Some libraries held thousands, a whole architecture of memory. They used wax tablets too, wooden boards coated in blackened wax, reusable, mutable. But those are gone now, melted, vanished. Only the clay remains. One room in the palace held a shelf of unreadable tablets, their symbols melted, blurred by heat. A fire maybe, or time. Still the shapes remain, impression without meaning, language asleep. That too is a kind of memory. Some scribes grew old without recognition. They did not lead prayers. They did not inherit temples. But their work remains, held in drawers, displayed under lights, or buried still, beneath sand and wheat. There was no monument to them, no statues. But in the tablets, they still speak, without voice, without breath, only pressure, only clay. Each tablet a breath held in time, each stylus stroke a heartbeat, each space a silence chosen. They did not write for glory. They wrote to steady the world, to catch its tremors before they became collapse. They did not write to be heard. They wrote to keep something still. And perhaps that stillness is what survives. Because even now, when the stars move strangely, when the wind feels too sharp, when a dream lingers past waking, it feels like someone, somewhere, should be writing it down. And as the tablets cooled in shadow, another kind of clay took shape, with wings. By night, Babylon shimmered, not with peace, but with watchfulness. Oil lamps flickered in lattice windows. The courtyards sighed with late wind, and the shadows stretched long and thin across walls made of baked earth and softened prayer. This was not a city that trusted the dark. It respected it, feared it, treated it like a guest with uncertain intent. For when the sun dipped behind the gates of the gods, things shifted. And so they made watchers, clay figures, small and strange, placed in walls, beneath floors, inside doorposts. They had faces, but not kind ones. Some bore snarling mouths, others had too many teeth. Wings stretched from shoulders, horns curled from brows, and tails wrapped around ankles of baked clay. They were not beautiful. They were not soft. They were made to be seen and feared, not by people, but by what could not be seen. The people of Babylon did not imagine their world empty. They imagined it crowded. Invisible beings drifted between shadows. Some were old, some were newer, some had names, some had none. But they all had appetite. Some caused illness, some stirred tempers, some whispered in sleep, some made cradles cold. The figures were guardians, apotropaic, protective by provocation, frightening to those who might pass through unseen. They were not worshipped, they were used, shaped by human hands, fired or dried, placed with care. One had a face split down the center, half beast, half man. One hand raised, the other clenched. Its tablet, found nearby, read, "He watches the night. Turn away." Another had the body of a lion and the eyes of a bird. Its feet were cracked, but its wings intact. The clay beneath it bore the symbol of a flame. These figures were not explained. They were simply placed by thresholds, at corners, near the bedroom, where sleep made the soul vulnerable. Sometimes they were buried with the building. Other times, they were moved from one home to the next, passed between families, wrapped in linen, tucked in baskets beside bread and tools. One figure, no taller than a thumb, was found inside a hollowed brick. It had no face, only a line for a mouth, and 2 crescent marks for eyes. The brick itself bore writing, soft and shaking. "Let no harm pass this place. Let no dream open." A plea, a warning, a spell. Most charms were not signed, but some bore names, not of the owner, but of the being they opposed. One word appears again and again, lamassu, a female demon, feared for her power over mothers and infants. She was said to wander at night, seeking cradles not watched closely enough. To ward her off, figures were made in her likeness, or in the form of her enemies. Pazuzu, the wind demon, was one such figure, terrifying in shape but used as protection, to frighten fright itself. Babylon believed in opposites, that fear could guard, that ugliness could shield, that clay, once formed with intent, could become a boundary. Some figures bore curses, not in fury, in function. May your eyes never open. May your wings melt in ash. Pass this gate and be unmade. They were etched into backs, hidden under bases, murmured while the clay was still soft. No one read them aloud, not after they were made. To speak them was to risk drawing attention. Instead, they were placed and left. Children were taught not to touch them, even if they found one in the garden, even if it looked like a toy. They knew better. The figures weren't dangerous, but they were working, like guards that never blinked. Some were shaped like dogs, with bared teeth and upright ears. Others like owls, eyes wide and hollow. One set was found arranged in a circle beneath a merchant's home. 7 figures, each facing outward, each unique. A ring of watchers, a silent perimeter. Some archaeologists believe they were placed during a time of war, not to stop soldiers, but to stop what followed them. Fear lingers, it leaves echoes, and the figures were shaped to absorb it. They were not only placed in homes, temples had them, storehouses, public baths, even wells, places where people gathered, where energy pooled, where spirits might grow curious. Some were tall. One stood nearly half a meter high, with wings spread, arms crossed, and a twisted horn rising from its brow. Its surface bore claw marks, not decorative, but scraped by hand, perhaps in fear, perhaps in reverence. They were not idle decorations. They were ritual objects, not just made, activated. Often, their placement involved words, whispers, names spoken in specific order, a pinch of ash, a splash of water, a breath held until silence returned. And then, they were sealed in place, not for display, not for admiration, but to keep the night still. The figures remind us that fear is ancient, that protection can be ugly, that safety can wear a snarling mask. Even now, some lie buried, unfound, unbroken, their wings curled inward, waiting for something they will never name. They are not asleep. They are listening. And in the hush of ancient stone, they still hold the line. But the softest spells were not shaped with faces, but with hands. The clay was soft, not wet, but giving, the way dusk yields to candlelight. No rush. The charm was not meant for speed. It was meant to listen, to carry something heavy and invisible. The maker did not speak loudly. Spells in Babylon were like breath, only effective when given gently. The clay square, still warm from the fire, lay in the center of a reed mat. A small bowl of oil waited. So did the ash. The spell was ready, but it had not been written. It had to be felt first. Fingers dipped in the bowl, then in the ash, then touched the clay, not with language, with presence. A thumb pressed into the corner, a knuckle to the edge. An index traced a crescent, and then stilled. There were no styluses this time, no wedge-shaped lines of cuneiform, only the memory of hands, the imprint of thought left behind without grammar. Babylonians knew that clay remembered. It held the weight of a palm, the hesitation of a wrist, the twist of a thumb, the secret heat of skin. Some charms were never meant to be read. They were felt, impressed, made sacred through touch. The spell, in this form, was a kind of silence, a conversation without speaking, a plea without words. Some tablets found centuries later show no writing at all, just fingertip dents, small grooves, spirals etched with a nail, a thumbprint right in the center, not accidental, not careless, placed with purpose and sealed in the heat of fire. These were not for record keeping. They were not meant for scribes. They were for the wind, for sleep, for whatever passed in the dark and did not knock. In one household, a charm like this was found tucked behind a hearthstone, flat, palm-sized, no inscription, just 3 impressions, a thumb, a finger, and a curved scratch like the mark of a ring. Perhaps the mother made it, perhaps a healer, perhaps a child was sick and nothing else worked. The charm was not powerful, but it was believed, and belief, when pressed into clay, has a way of settling in. The act itself was spell enough. In temples, where scribes wrote daily, there were still corners where these silent charms gathered, behind door frames, under the first stone step. By the altars, where water bowls steamed. Priests did not always announce their rituals. Some things were left underfoot. Let the gods find them if they were curious. Among the tablets discovered near Essen, a group of 30 held no text, only hands. Right hands, pressed at angles, some large, some small. One even bore a faint line from an old scar, repeated across 3 tablets, the same hand, the same motion, a ritual repeated. Some historians think these were test impressions, practice, or perhaps signatures, but others say no, they were the spell, pressed just after sunrise, while the air still held dreams, sealed with breath, buried with care. Thumbprints appear more often than we might expect, in grave sites, on roof tiles, on bricks that were never meant to be seen. One was found inside a jar, wrapped in linen, with a single carved bead beside it. No text, just one dent, one thumb, pressed so deeply it cracked the clay. It is easy to forget that fingers are ancient, older than ink, older than the words we now use to remember them. And in Babylon, the hand was more than a tool. It was a vessel, a spell wand, a maker of boundaries. Some healers believed that placing your thumb in fresh clay could draw illness from the body. Leave it there, bury it deep, let the ground hold it. Others whispered that a touch before firing made the spell listen better, gave it a direction, a loyalty. To whom did this thumb belong? They don't say, and maybe it doesn't matter, because what matters in the end is the act, the stillness, the breath, the ash, the warmth of human skin meeting earth. To press a finger into clay was to say, "This is real. I was here. Let the silence hold me." One charm bears 7 thumbprints, placed like petals in a flower shape. No names, no marks. A communal plea, perhaps, or a ward made in grief. Some charms like this were given to travelers, wrapped in reeds, tied with string, a small weight in the pocket. Not a message, but a touch from home. Others were placed under pillows, to catch dreams, to catch whatever tried to slip in beside them. And some were destroyed, deliberately, smashed after they had done their work, buried with broken jars, so that whatever they held would not follow. Even the act of breaking was done with care. A final gesture, a soft goodbye. The clay crumbles, but the imprint stays. In the shards, the thumbprint remains. A quiet fossil of fear, or hope, or love too great to say aloud. Even now, archaeologists brush dust from clay and find fingers, so human, so close. Not kings, not scribes, just hands, just touch, just the soft pressure of someone who wanted something to be okay. And somewhere, beyond the city walls, a wind began to turn strange again, a fever in the reeds. It was swept daily. The floor of the home, packed earth, dusted with reed ash, smoothed with the palm and heel. A quiet act, always before the sun rose too high, while shadows still clung to the corners like breath. But there was a place, just beneath the loom, where the ash was never moved, not for years. The sweepers knew, the mother knew, even the children knew. There was something under there, not a secret, not a curse, just a layer of remembering, a thin veil of gray, soft as mothwing, laid down with care. It was a practice older than kings, older than writing, a remnant of gesture, not doctrine. In the cities of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, homes held histories underfoot, not recorded on walls or monuments, but beneath rugs, beneath feet, beneath the ordinary acts of ordinary days. Ash was sacred in a quiet way, not because it burned, but because it had already burned, because it had changed. They gathered it from hearths, from lamps, from sacred fires, and placed it where memory needed to rest. In one house, uncovered by wind and trowel, archaeologists found a floor strangely soft. When brushed, it revealed a compact layer of ash, woven with pale linen fibers and a single chicken bone, polished smooth. No artifact, no offering, just remains of a moment. They had swept around it for decades, not from superstition, but reverence, the way one might leave a chair empty for someone lost. Some homes kept such places. They were not labeled, they were not explained. A guest might step around them without knowing, but a grandmother would pause. A child might glance and say nothing. One such ash bed was found beneath a corner post, tiny footprints preserved in the soot, barefoot, the size of a sparrow's hop. Layered beside them, a scattering of millet seeds in the tooth of a comb. Perhaps a child had stood there in stillness when the fever came. Perhaps they placed the seeds as an offering or as a game. The floor remembered. Ash absorbed everything. Footsteps, spilled wine, words spoken too softly to be kept in air. When woven with clay dust and time, it hardened into something like velvet, delicate but stubborn. Beneath temple floors, the ash grew thicker, mixed with crushed stone, candle wax, and hair. In the temple of Ereshkigal, a narrow trench ran along the rear wall, once thought to be drainage, later found filled with alternating layers: bone ash, reed ash, clay, then bone again. An order repeated with care. Scholars debated the meaning. Some said ritual, some said burial, but some said memory. Not of one person, but of fear, of fever, of years when sleep came quickly and did not return. There were years the rivers ran high, when the rats came close, when breath was short. The people laid down layers beneath their homes, not to hide, but to mark. This was the year we boiled bitter herbs. This was the year of the red moons. This was when my sister sang in her sleep and never woke. The ash knew and held it all. One charm maker in the city of Sippar recorded in a faded tablet, "I lay no glyphs this year. The spell has already been spoken. We walk through it now. Let the floor remember." Even after the charm crumbled, the floor would remember. In some homes, they placed the clay charms face down in the ash. Let the oil bleed into the dust. Let the scent mix with time. Once, a tablet was found fused to the earth, not buried, just pressed so long that it became part of the ground. Its text was unreadable, melted from centuries of slow warmth. But on the back, faintly, a spiral, a fingertip spiral, drawn not with urgency, but boredom perhaps. A small, quiet act of comfort in the midst of flame and famine. Sometimes the ash held stranger things: tiny eggs, a brass needle, a clump of hair tied with thread. Not artifacts, not trash, just things not meant to be touched again. There were homes with no doors, only curtains, and beneath those curtains, always, a narrow line of ash, to mark the crossing, to soften the sound of parting, a ritual line of forgetting. So many things passed over that line: visitors, illness, news, time. But the ash beneath held firm. In the city of Nippur, beneath a merchant's house, they found ash arranged in circles, 5 of them, each beneath a wooden stool. The family sat there every night, eating lentils, talking softly. No one disturbed the circles. Each stool stood like a memory tower, and beneath them, layered years of meals, arguments, prayers that never left the mouth. Ash remembered it all. Today, museums sweep these floors, gently, with brushes, with masks. But sometimes a restorer will pause, feeling something in the texture, a thin unevenness, a place where the sweepers once stopped, and beneath that inch of silence, a bone, a charm, or nothing. Just the stillness of soot and the echo of someone who once sat and sighed and spoke nothing at all. The ash beneath the floor was not an altar, not a grave. It was a gesture, the same kind made when someone closes a book slowly or stands in a doorway, listening but not entering. It asked for nothing. It offered no answers. It simply remained. And beyond the rooms, beyond the city, a ziggurat waited in moonlight, its bricks humming with forgotten names. They found it beneath a broken stair, software still soft. The clay, sun-dried but never fired, had kept its form for thousands of years, cracking, flaking, but intact. It had never met the kiln, never met flame, never been hardened into permanence. A charm that was not burned, a spell paused halfway, a wish never sealed. In Babylon, charms were usually fired, placed near the heat of sacred brick ovens, watched carefully as the red-orange glow locked intention into stone. Firing made it last, firing made it strong, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they left the charm soft, on purpose. The unfired charm was a different thing, a living thing, still breathing, still shifting with the air, still able to dissolve if held too tightly. Its power wasn't in its endurance. Its power was in its risk. They say such charms were made when the wish was private, too tender, too temporary, not to last beyond the fever, not to outlive the dream. Some were meant to decay, to fall apart quietly under floorboards or inside walls or beneath a pillow damp from breath. The charm they found near the stair was no more than 2 finger lengths wide, flat, oval, etched with tiny dots, not writing, just texture, perhaps a code, perhaps nothing at all. But when brushed gently, the shape of a crescent appeared, the sweep of a nail, a thumbnail most likely, still visible. Someone had pressed it and then stopped, had held their wish back from the kiln. Why? No one can say. But those who study these quiet things believe it meant the charm was for sleep, for one night only, for the fever that rose and perhaps passed. Some texts mention them, unfired charms. They must be kept close, one healer wrote, until morning or morning, whichever comes first. Another tablet, more cryptic. The ones not burned must be held, not buried, not stored. They are companions, not messengers. And another still. If the wish is made in silence, let the clay remain soft. Let it choose its own ending. Not all spells were commands. Some were offerings. Some were simply questions, asked with trembling hands. To fire such a charm might have felt like shouting what should only have been whispered. So they left them warm in the sun, or tucked them into the folds of linen where the body might sleep against them. Some were found in the palm of skeletons, curled like stones, unbaked, crumbling with the wind's sigh. One was uncovered in a jar beneath a baker's stall, unfired, surrounded by tiny bones, rats perhaps, and 5 lentil seeds, a charm of hunger or a charm against it. Soft charms were more fragile than belief. They needed to be touched carefully, kept from rain, sheltered from fire. But in that fragility was something powerful, something like truth. A charm that could break was more honest than one that could not, because the wish itself might change, because not all hope is meant to harden. In the temple quarters, unfired charms were rarely kept on shelves. They were hidden, in cloth, in bowls of grain, between reeds under the floor. One priestess recorded in a corner of her journal, "I do not fire the charm. She is still breathing. I must not make the prayer permanent if she is not. It was a spell for a sister, scribbled in haste, never finished. The clay charm from that entry was found 2 chambers away, dried in sun, etched with one word: return. No other markings. It broke in the archaeologist's hands, not from clumsiness, just from the softness of time. A spell allowed to die, as it was meant to. Even today, the museums keep these rare charms in sealed cases, humidity controlled, lights dimmed, not because they are valuable, but because they are already dissolving. The act of seeing them hastens their end, but perhaps that too is part of their power. In Babylon, nothing truly sacred was meant to last. Only the walls, only the rivers, not the wishes. Soft charms were for fevered children, for mourners who hadn't yet accepted the mourning, for lovers unsure if their longing was real. They were made from what was left: the last bit of clay, the corner of a reed mat, the press of a fingertip after the tears had dried. One such charm was found inside a flute, hidden there, unfired, pressed with the print of a lip, the faintest curve, a spell of silence perhaps, or music that could never be played. Another, shaped like a leaf, was discovered inside a cooking pot, its edges licked with black from an accidental burn, but the center remained pale, soft, whole, a charm nearly hardened, but not quite. The ones that weren't burned have little to tell us in words, but everything to tell us in stillness. They were carried quietly, not declared. They were placed under the tongue like a last word that might never be spoken. They were cradled like birds. They were allowed to disappear. Some were placed in water, let to dissolve on the 7th day if the fever broke. Others were buried in the roots of date palms, returning wish to seed, seed to shadow, shadow to silence. Even now, beneath layers of earth and forgetting, there may be charms so soft, so sun-dried, that they wait intact, not hardened, not broken, just waiting. Because someone, once, was afraid to seal the prayer, and in that hesitation, in that sacred softness, they gave the world a different kind of spell. A spell not for power, not for protection, but for letting go. And far beyond the ruins, in a chamber no wind could reach, a final charm still rests, half dried, half whispered, half waiting. They are cataloged now, indexed, archived, wrapped in tissue paper beneath soft artificial light, stacked on stainless steel trays in drawers that slide without sound, not in palaces, not in temples, not even under moon-soaked brick, but in basements of museums, behind key-carded doors, behind silence. These were once the fever dreams of Babylon. Now they are numbers, reference codes, barcodes on plastic bins, clay charms, foundation deposits, healing tokens, whatever they are called now. They lie still, far from the breath that shaped them. Most are broken, fragmented, corners missing, names half erased. A charm once placed beneath a lintel now lies under a label, object number 74-32-88, provenance uncertain, material clay, condition fragile, no mention of the fever, no mention of the whisper, only fragile, which is honest in its way. Some tablets shattered during excavation, some while crossing oceans, some simply collapsed under the weight of air. They had lasted 3,000 years, but couldn't survive the breath of modernity. And still, the pieces hum, not loudly, not like music, not even like memory, but like something almost remembered, like the silence left behind when a lullaby ends. Some curators claim they've heard it, that while Sliding open the drawer, the tiniest sound escapes, like warm sand shifting, like air moving through reeds. But they never say it out loud, not in grant proposals, not in exhibition notes, just in passing, over coffee, in twilight. A conservator at the British Museum once held a shard for too long. It darkened in her palm. She placed it back. It stayed warm. That charm had been hidden in a ziggurat wall, unmarked, unnamed, but etched with what seemed to be the side of a face. Only one eye, open. The shard bore no inscription, only grooves. But the curvature was unmistakable. It had been kissed, a pressed mouth into wet clay. Centuries ago, now that kiss sleeps in a sealed drawer, labeled and alone. Across the sea in Berlin, a museum holds a collection of crescent-shaped tokens, small, curved, soft-fired, each one with 2 tiny holes. Threaded charms, perhaps, worn against the chest, for heart protection maybe, or to keep the lungs quiet at night. They were found together in what was once a child's room, a floor littered with reed pens, spilled dye, a half-crushed fig. The charms had no writing, just small circles, repeated. 7 per charm. They now rest on foam under glass, numbered, photographed, measured. The glass keeps the dust off, but it also keeps the dreams in. Visitors pass them by. Tour guides do not mention them. They are too small to matter. But Babylon knew better. Babylon placed meaning in small things, in the breath between syllables, in the space between bricks, in a charm no larger than a thumbprint, in the break of the clay. Because breaking wasn't always a failure. Some charms were meant to break, to release their power, to signal that the prayer had been heard. The broken ones are the ones that worked. At Yale, a tablet fragment bears only a single mark, a crescent scratched into its back. It was once buried under a storeroom, found among fish bones and rusted needles. A scholar dusted it, puzzled. Why place a moon behind a tablet, and why break it after? No answers came, just a whisper in Akkadian, half preserved. The oil did not boil, the shadow did not fall. It is safe to sleep. That tablet sleeps again now, in a drawer colder than Babylon ever was. It will not be disturbed. No kiln awaits it, no breath, only time, only the weightless hush of millennia forgetting themselves. Somewhere under these institutions are thousands of them, untagged, untranslated, unremembered, clay birds, clay faces, clay pieces that once carried names, now known only as fragments. But not all dreams are whole, and not all sleep is clean. Some of these charms bear burn marks, evidence of fire long past, evidence of cities that fell, a heat that shattered towers but did not erase the spell beneath. The spell endured because it was buried deep, because it was made of silence, not sound. One archaeologist once joked, "The gods forgot to dig them up." But perhaps the gods left them there on purpose, left them to be found by quiet hands in quiet places at the end of loud centuries. And perhaps the gods aren't watching anymore. Perhaps the only watchers left are the drawers, the lights, the tags. But even there, beneath plexiglass and protocol, the sleep continues, because the charms do not wake. They do not break themselves. They remain in the posture of prayer, even when shattered, even when misfiled, even when no one remembers what they were meant to do. And still, in the soft dark of the archive, one charm waits to be named, or perhaps left unnamed forever. So now, the clay cools, the breath slows. Babylon sleeps again, its fever dimmed beneath the dust. If this story brought you calm, you can always return. The charms wait quietly, and somewhere, another forgotten place begins to stir in the dark. But for now, let it rest.